Yesterday, whenever you do have a question, we need to make sure you get a microphone in your hands because they need to hear it on the live feed. So we'll make sure that we get the microphone to you before you ask a question, even if you say you have a big mouth and it doesn't matter. But that happened yesterday. So anyway, we're glad to have Dr. Reddick here, and I'm gonna let him go ahead and tell us a little bit about where he's been, what he's doing, and then we'll just go to a question and answer from there. So welcome, Dr. Reddick.
Thank you. Is this on? Okay, this is on. People say I have a pretty big mouth without a microphone, but I'll use it, and I may not use it depending. But I am Niles Reddick. I'm Vice President of Academic Affairs and Student Affairs at Abraham Baldwin College in Georgia. And I'm delighted to be one of the finalists here at Cleveland State, and I know you all have seen my resume. It's online. I will be glad to take questions about anything you want to ask me, almost anything. Anyway, I understand there, Will, is it you're going to ask me, you want to start it off and just get it out of the way, or? You're going to make me wait, okay. All right. Well, as many of you know who've seen my resume, I spent 13 years in beautiful Tennessee, Middle Tennessee at Motlow State, and took a job in Georgia, which is where I'm originally from, about 7 years ago. And let me introduce my wife, Michelle. I should have introduced her first. I apologize, but I'm glad she came with me today. She can't ask questions, by the way, but any of the rest of you can ask questions. So why don't we open it up for some questions, and I'll be glad to take those now.
Thanks. I was wondering if you could walk us through a little bit about the process of the second century reforms that you led, and in particular if you could address the changes and how they affected both faculty and staff there as you kind of led them through those innovations.
Okay. What he is referring to, for those of you who may not know, is a strategic plan that our president, Dr. David Bridges at ABAC, we call it Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College, ABAC, the cabinet, the president and the cabinet put in place around the time I came, which was in 2007, back to Georgia. And there were a number of initiatives that we put in place. At the time, Georgia was experiencing, as many states were, declining funding from the state. And so we wanted to do two things. We wanted to be able to increase enrollment. We wanted to be able to increase our reputation, our academic programs, and so forth. And at the same time, grow our college from a financial perspective because we were losing some funding and some enrollment at that time. So we did a number of different kinds of things. One thing that we did, we had gone through a SACS level change from a level 1 institution to a level 2 institution because we were deemed a state college by the Board of Regents, and so we did put in a limited number of baccalaureate degree programs. And as part of that process, we went through a level change visit. And it wasn't a recommendation, you know, SACS gives recommendations, but informally they can also make comments to institutions as they depart. And one of their comments was to us, if you're going to be a level 2 institution and offer baccalaureate programs, you really do need to act and walk and talk like a baccalaureate degree institution. So the way we were organized at the time, we had 6 academic divisions, and each one of those academic divisions, of course, ran that area for the college. And so because we had started offering a few baccalaureate programs, we charged a task force as part of that second century project with a reorganization of the academic unit. And so that took a year. Faculty, we had senior faculty lead that project. We looked at tons of different scenarios. We decided on 6 schools as a result of that. And those division chairs at the time became deans, except in, I think, one instance where we didn't have anyone who was a division chair, and so we advertised for a dean position. In addition, That Second Century project looked at a few years out from a perspective of what additional degree programs we might put in place. At the time, that was in 2007, we put in place our bachelor's degree in diversified agriculture, and we put in a bachelor's degree in turf grass and golf course management. But we, as part of that, recognized that we wanted to advance the institution by offering some additional bachelor's degrees, and so we charged a task force with coming up with ideas of potential growth for the institution. We looked at funding. At the time, we didn't have a formal grants program. We had some grants on campus, but we didn't have a lot. So we put together a grants office under the umbrella foundation area, and she works in external affairs. That's what we call it now. And since 2007, we've brought in about $20 million in grants. Some of those grants are high grants like HEP, CAMP, which are Hispanic program grants through the U.S. Department of Education. We have a Migrant Ed grant, which I think was a $1.2 million grant that goes over 3 or 4 years through the U.S. Department of Education and the Georgia Department of Education. But we really made grants a priority for our institution to advance the institution. One of the ones that I think I'm most proud of is, I read all of the grants. I have to edit. I'm an editor, so I always fix all the mistakes before they go out to wherever they're going. But I think the grants they're all wonderful and they bring so much to our institution. I'm most proud of our NSF grant, which was a National Science Foundation grant to bring in about $700,000 for scholarships for students in our biology program. We put in a new bachelor's degree in biology with a regular track and then a pre-professional kind of track to med school or whatever professional school they want to go to. I'm proud of that one, but I'm really proud of the ones like the Fulbright grants. The Fulbright program out of DC is a wonderful program. It brings a lot of internationalization to campuses, and so we have had, I think I've been there 6 years, I'm starting my 7th year there. Every year we have had a Fulbright experience. It may not have been a grant experience, but we had a Fulbright grant where we sent faculty and some staff to Brazil. We had a Fulbright grant. We brought a scholar in agricultural economics to our institution for 1 year. We had another Fulbright scholar who came from Hungary, a sociologist, to our campus for a year. And we brought in a Fulbright scholar who was at Georgia Southwestern State University, who was from Australia, in for a day. And we had a Fulbright come in from Savannah State University in economics for a day to give a talk. And those kinds of experiences, you may not fill an auditorium, obviously, with students all of the time because of their busy schedules, but certainly those kinds of experiences really do bring an internationalization, a globalization, if you will, and make it real to them. It's not a video. It's not something they're going to the library to research. It's something that's real right there in front of them. And so I think those kinds of things are just a couple of examples of what we've done. I talked about this earlier with a different group. We did change our admission criteria, and I'll give this audience this example. I think it's a good one. We wanted to, as part of our Complete College America, Complete College Georgia project, we have changed our admission criteria a little bit to where we recalculate the incoming GPA of high school seniors, because many times, that high school GPA includes elective credit, which is not collegiate prep course for those collegiate classes. So we only calculate the GPA based on that pre-collegiate coursework now. But as part of our retention effort and our graduation effort, we changed our academic standards of progress, which was a major change for us. We did some studies at the Institutional Research Office, provided us some data about how many students are on probation, what's their retention to the second year, after their first lack of success in the first year. And you know, it was pretty abysmal, 25%. And so we wanted to change our academic standards to line them up with the financial aid standards, or at least more closely align them with financial aid standards. So we set our academic standards at 2.0 across the board. So here at Cleveland, you can come in as a freshman student your first semester, and you can have a 1.4 GPA at 26 hours and not be on probation or not be suspended. And so we wanted to get away from that. Mike drove me to Athens earlier today. I appreciated it. It was a fast ride in a police car. First time my wife's ever been in the back of a police car. Hopefully the last time, right? But the interesting thing, he and I were having a conversation about college football and sports. And you know, we were talking about sports and how you have to set the bar high. You want these people who play sports to be motivated, right? You want your softball team to be a great softball team, right? You don't want them to be the losers. So what do? Well, you try to motivate them, you try to encourage them, you try to get them to do better, right? I don't think, you know, I hate for academics to use analogies from sports, but I think we can learn something from that as academic folks. You want to set the standard higher. And so that's what we did. We knew we would have more students put on probation when we changed our academic standards, because you could literally be on campus for a year with a 0 GPA and we wouldn't kick you out. Now, you know, there's something when we talk about accountability, you know, of the federal resources and the state resources, you know, we're not being good stewards of the tax revenue from a state when we allow students to hang around with a 0 GPA and just have a good time. So we want to set that bar a little bit higher. We know we're not going to have as many people be as successful. So what we did was we started, like you guys have started, an early intervention system where we created a 1-hour seminar class for these students who are placed on probation immediately following their fall semester. So in January, we put all of these students, we had huge classes because we had quite a few, couple of hundred, on probation. And so what we did with those, we assigned each one of them an academic support counselor. They had to come up with an academic plan. I went in and spoke to them, talked to them about telling their parents they were on probation. They ought to be ashamed. Same thing my parents probably told me years ago too. And we had financial aid come in and talk about the implications of being on probation and how they're going to lose these dollars. And it worked. It didn't work 100%, but instead of having a 25% second year retention, we had a 50%. So it did work. It doubled. That many students returned. And so that's the kind of thing that you want to look at. You want to set the bar, but at the same time, when you set that bar, you better have something in place to help them get to that bar, just like in sports. I think that's a good analogy. Thank you, Mike. I bet you didn't know I was going to call on you and cite you today as a resource. But I hope I've answered your question, and you want to move to the next one, Jared? Oh, you didn't wait till the end.
Just wait, yeah, one person, that's all it took.
I have two questions. I'll say the
part
hard
one and
for
part
later.
two.
If you were to write the 10 commandments of a college president, can I have 5 thou shalt and 5 thou shalt not?
Okay. That's an interesting question. You're in the humanities, correct? Okay. That sounds like something I might come up with, being a humanities person. I think that a president should be honest. I think a president should have integrity. I think a president should lead by example. I think a president should be a good steward of fiscal resources, whether those are private or public. And I think a president should have his or her heart and soul into a job, so much so that it's not a job. It's just a way of life. I think I exhibit those in my current job. You can call people and ask them if you want to. Some may disagree with that. But I think I've always been that way. You know, I love to get up early. Michelle will tell you I drive her crazy. Computers in the bedroom, so 4 o'clock in the morning I'm doing email, drinking Starbucks. And, you know, that's the last thing I do before I go to bed. You know, is check work, see what's going on. You know, it's always better if you can solve something before you go to bed than put it off till the next day. So, you know, I don't think it's necessarily, those are my ideas. You know, those are old ideas. There are plenty of examples of wonderful leaders that have exhibited those kinds of qualities, whether it be in college president rankings or, you know, senator or who, well, you may not find many who get that now, but anyway, some I'm sure at some point had that. But I think that's something that, you know, your mama's taught you, your grandmothers or whoever, somebody in your life, you know, taught you to do these things, and some people live by them, some people don't. The one thing, I'll name you 5 things I don't think people should do. In some ways, they're just the opposites of the things that I think people should do. But you know, I don't think you can lie to people. You know, you should never lie to people. And I think I can make a good distinction there because I'm a writer. So, you know, I write fiction. So sometimes I don't know what's truth and what's not the truth. But I do think you do know that, you know, deep down in your heart. But I don't think you should lie to people. I don't think you should treat people any differently, no matter who they are, what job they have. You know, we're all participants in a process. And the process is to make students successful. You know, they come to a college with a goal at some level in their mind of getting a degree or getting some additional education or getting some workforce training or whatever the case may be. And as employees of a college, you know, I think we're all there to help them make that mark. And so I think customer service is a valuable asset to all employees of a college. You know, whether it's the custodian or the president, you know, it doesn't matter. You know, we all run into the students. I talked to 2 students yesterday. One was a pre-pharmacy major who's transferring to South University in Knoxville. And last night at dinner, our waitress was a student, took classes at Whirlpool, name's Beth, single parent, trying to make it, you know, working at Whirlpool during the day in customer service and waitressing tables at, you know, at night at O'Charlie's. Absolutely delightful young lady. But she and of course I was surrounded by sports paraphernalia on the wall, but she spoke positively about the institution, positively about her experience here, her desire to further her education. And, you know, that's what it's all about. We're all here to help students, whether it's here or some other institution. Just a few more. Oh, shall nots. I think people need to, I think a president should be available. I don't think a president should make a decision without input. That input may be from, you know, a vice president, or it may be from, you know, a faculty member. I think it's a democratic process for the most part, but when it comes to certain decisions, I don't think you can make those as part of a democracy, like a personnel decision. I think presidents need to be available. They need to have an open door policy as much as possible. Our president is so busy, it's hard for him to do that. He's on the road, he's raising money, he's meeting with politicians. I mean, that's very difficult. He's often tied up. But when he is on campus, his door is open, and people do walk in. And parents walk in, students walk in, faculty walk in. I think that's important. I used to joke when I ran the Smyrna campus for Motlow in Tennessee, and we were in the National Guard facility before we had our own building, that we didn't even have a door. So I had an open door policy because we didn't have a door. But finally we got a door and a building, and I still had an open door policy though. I think that covers them all, doesn't it? Okay. Good question. You about stumped me there.
Okay, you are here, and we're taking a look at you as a potential president. Surely you must be looking at us as well. So what would you say are the top concerns for Cleveland State, and how would you address them?
Okay, that's a fair question and an excellent question. I spent a good, hour in Athens today, and I think you have a major project there that needs your assistance. And that project is, I think you need a facility in Athens. And whether it's a shared facility with somebody else, like someone mentioned to me, or whether it's a standalone facility, you need that. You know, at one point in my life, when I worked at Motlow, we had, Motlow was not unlike Cleveland State. I think when I was there, I think it was about the same size. We were about 3,200, I think, when I was still there. But we had 4 campuses: the Lynchburg campus, Moore County campus. Well, it was Lynchburg, it's metropolitan Moore County. Anyway, that was the main campus. It had about 2,000 students at that time. We had about 300 or 400 in Fayetteville, and then we had a campus in McMinnville, which had probably 600. And I started the Smyrna campus. We had it at the high school. At night, I was a faculty member. I was teaching there. Michelle and I lived in Murfreesboro, and I was driving from one campus to another, like so many people do. And our president at the time, Dr. Glass, wanted to have a campus somewhere in Rutherford County. And so we looked at different places that we could rent, you know, and that was fine. We were able to move in and work out a relationship with the National Guard, and so we moved into the National Guard. September 11th came and changed that to some extent, at least for that day. And that was a very trying time, because at that time we had several hundred students, and we didn't know what we were going to do, and it kind of was the impetus, I think, for us to really get moving and try to get some land and get some money and work through a process to get a facility in Smyrna, which we eventually got. You know, around 2007, they finally opened the campus. I had already gone back to Georgia at that point and was in this job now. But they finally got a campus, and now they have, you know, a beautiful campus, and they've just finished another building there. But it took literally, Dr. Glass started it. Dr. Art Walker was our second president, who was extremely involved with me at that time as a director in securing money from the various municipalities that were involved. At that time, it was the county of Rutherford, the city of Murfreesboro, the town of Smyrna, and the city of Laverne, all pitched in a certain amount of money or land or infrastructure or whatever was the case. We had some private money available. We had some state money that came in, and there were a lot of people involved in that process, and it takes a long time. I mean, look, that started in the 90s. It wasn't until 2000 and something when they opened the campus for the first campus or the first building. It takes a long time, but somebody needs to be working on that now. You know, it may take years. Well, you've already got 600 people up there in that little tiny facility with no parking. You know, and really substandard, I think, in some of the classrooms. You know, you don't have the best equipment up there or whatever. Those are the kinds of things that long-term need to be worked on now to get that. And I think there's clearly, you know, a need for facilities here. You know, Cleveland, though, is a beautiful town, and you have a lot to offer. This is a very progressive community. It reminds me very much of Murfreesboro, actually, because it has all of the amenities that, you know, a larger community has without feeling like a large community. You've got a lot of corporations here who I know are very supportive. Many of them are on your foundation board, representatives anyway. And so I think you could get that done, but you really do have to form alliances to get those kinds of things done. It's very time-consuming and difficult, but the payoff is worth it tenfold, 100-fold maybe. Oh, come on. We're on TV. At least y'all look good, right?
Don't make me give it back to Will.
Would you expand a little bit on what you were just talking to us about? How would you address those concerns? What would you do about those concerns?
As president, I think that I would certainly meet with local officials, with state officials, with private parties to try to get enough resources to begin a project. I think that would take a while. You know, you really have to have something to sell. You know, you just can't sell ideas to people. Well, you can, but most people aren't buying ideas anymore. And so I think it's important to have some long-term plan and goal before you start a project like that. But I think that's how you begin it, really. You go into a community and you start talking to people about what you'd like to do. It didn't happen overnight for Smyrna, I guarantee you that. And it was a very difficult process. You know, we had Middle Tennessee State University right there in the same county. They didn't particularly want us in their county, even though it was part of our 11 county service area. And it's the same here. I mean, you have other institutions, you know, in your service area that you really aren't competing against, but you really are competing against ultimately, because you're trying to get students, and so are those other institutions. It's kind of a dance, you know, it's a delicate kind of process. Welcome. You want me to go? I'm closer.
I'm just going to pick up on where you were talking about raising the bar with the students, and possibly this is raising the bar for horizontally as well as vertically, and that's competency-based education. I'm just curious to know how you think we might be able to integrate competency-based education to help students achieve their learning goals.
Yeah, competency-based education is a little more difficult, I think, in the collegiate environment, particularly when it comes to your more traditional arts and sciences. I do think you have a jump start on that by your co-op program, which I reviewed and was quite impressed by. I think you have a jump start on it with your service learning ideas and your programs, because I think what you're doing there is you're giving students an opportunity, you know, not only to get maybe internship credit through that co-op experience, to get service credit as well. We do that too, to some extent, at our college. When we put in our interdisciplinary liberal arts degree program, which is rural studies, is the first degree of its kind in the country, a very interesting kind of program that takes a look at rural areas that are suffering. You know, when you look at the country, you look at rural areas, you have about 25% of the population that lives in rural areas, and those are where the high unemployment rates are, because, you know, many of those jobs have gone overseas that were in rural areas, and so those people. There's a fascinating concept called the brain drain, which is where people graduate from high school, students graduate from high school, but rather than stay and invest themselves in the community, they go off to college somewhere else. But once they graduate from college, they don't come back. And so you have an older population there with issues because the younger population is gone. And I think what we did was we took that interdisciplinary liberal arts degree program and we incorporated a 9-credit-hour internship into that program, which is similar to your co-op program. And so what we do is a student can take a 9-credit-hour internship, or they can take 3 3-hour internships, or any combination thereof. And as a component of some of the coursework, we also have a service learning component where they can go in and they're not getting credit for a particular class, service credit, but it's just something that they're doing as part of that class. And I think what that really does is it gives them skills because we're confronting them with real world situations, and that is helping them on the academic side. Those are the kinds of things that are really the models, for institutions across the country, and I think you'll see more and more of that in the future at institutions. There's a big debate, going on nationwide about liberal arts. How can the liberal arts survive, in this time period? And I think that's one way it can survive. I think academics sometimes has become disconnected from the world. We kind of hide away in our silos and write and publish and read and do all of these things, but it's hard to carry on a conversation at the grocery store with somebody sometimes. And I think that's important. I think it's important for us to educate students, but at the same time give them those real world kinds of experiences which increase their competencies.
This, again, will draw upon your current position and how you might apply it here at Cleveland State. To what degree do you use assessment and data-driven decision-making from the academic part that you're currently enrolled with?
Well, we have all of those same processes in place, but I will tell you that, I've had quite a bit of SACS experience. Assessment is a very difficult thing for anyone to grasp, quite frankly, in academics, because I think that, I don't know how many of you are faculty, but when you're a faculty member, you know what you need to do to get this material covered. And we all have different ways of covering that material, right? But today's model is more of a kind of an integrated approach in the classroom where you may do a little lecture, but you don't want to spend too much time because the millennials aren't going to focus on the lecture. So you need to do group work, and you need to do different strategies and use different mediums in your class, in your classroom experience. But the difficult thing, I think, for us sometimes is to assess that and how we are teaching that. I'm going to back up and I'm going to come back to that, but I think one of our biggest problems in higher education is not so much that we're not doing what we say we're doing. I believe we're doing what we say we're doing. I firmly believe that. I just believe that it's sometimes difficult for us to convey that to someone external. And I think SACS is the perfect example of that. I shared this with the group earlier. I just got back from a SACS visit in Florida where I was on an on-site SACS visit for a school, and my job was to review faculty credentials. Well, one of my jobs. I mean, you're reviewing all of this stuff, but my sole purpose was to do this one. And I thought, oh, well, that's fun, looking at faculty credentials. But, it was actually a very interesting process because the off-site team had found them in non-compliance, and I made up my mind going in they would be non-compliant. But yet I spent, is Joan in here? There she is. I spent all day in the human resources office, looking at 60 faculty files. And each one that I reviewed, I said, well, there's not a problem here. There's not a problem here. There's not a problem here. The problem was that they didn't convey that to the outside reviewer. And I think that's what happens a lot of times. We know what we've done. We say we've done it. You ought to believe us, But unfortunately, that's not the way it works, with accreditation. And I think in an era of accountability, we have to do more to increase our skill to be able to convey that. I think it's also true that one of our largest problems in higher education is not that we're not doing our jobs, but many times students aren't motivated. And I want to go back to the whole idea of recruiting. I think you have to you never know who's going to be motivated and who's not going to be motivated. You don't know who's going to be a successful student and who's not going to be a successful student. I wrote in my statement of educational philosophy, I think maybe y'all have that too, I can't remember if I sent that in, but you know, you can, in a community college setting where you have an access institution, you can have a ninth grade dropout who took the GED, you know, or you could have a valedictorian from a local high school in your class. And somehow or another, you have to convey the material to both of these students in a way that they both get it. But at the base, the very core of that student is their idea of motivation, and if they're motivated to get to that level or not. And I think that's a problem that we have with, it's not a problem of millennial students. A lot of people will say that's a millennial student, you know, chalk it up to the millennial student or whatever. I think that's a problem for us in higher education, because I think we become complacent sometimes, and I think we always have to look at the trends, look at the data that our institution has available. A lot of times institutions don't have good data. We didn't always have good data. You know, we've built that data over time. We had a conversation, I don't know if Adam's in here or not, we had a conversation about that with respect to alumni. You know, we didn't have a lot of alumni data available, but I think that's important. So I think recruiting a more committed student is going to get you the results that you need from an assessment perspective better than recruiting an uncommitted student. But the question is, who's uncommitted and who's not? How do you know? There's no real marker out there that can tell you what student is going to perform and what student is not going to perform. And I think that's a problem that all institutions face. It's a retention issue, it's a graduation issue, it's a recruitment issue, it runs the whole gamut. And just to give you a quick example of that, you know, when I talked about earlier how we had those students who cycled back around the second year, it went from 25 to 50%. When the 25% didn't return, some of those students who did not return, we surveyed those students. What happened to you? Where'd you go? You were only on probation. You know, we had this system in place. They didn't think they made the right choice in the college to begin with. And I think that is a major issue from a recruitment perspective that colleges really haven't thought about. If you could think about how you recruit the student, you recruit, and how you get them to the admission and then to the retention phase and then ultimately to graduation, you have to get that. There's something missing. You have to get that figured out. Otherwise, you won't have the success that you want to have with students. How a student makes a choice about where to attend the institution to begin with, it is a very important thing. Students are blasted with information about colleges. Every high school has all of this literature available. Some of the counselors go out to the high schools and meet with the students, but ultimately that student has to make a choice. Sometimes they make the right choice, sometimes they don't make the. But we shouldn't be penalized for the bad choices that other people make, right? But unfortunately we are. That's the way society works. I guess I've answered your question. You can ask some more though.
I was wondering if you would possibly speak to give us your thoughts about in the academic side of the house, the non-traditional delivery of courses, you know, whether it be online, in cohorts, hybrid courses, that kind of thing. I wonder if you could speak to that, please.
Sure. Any particular direction you want me to speak? Give me the answer and then I'll give it back to you in a different way.
Well, as I said when you were going around introducing yourself, I am responsible for the cohort programs that we are initiating here at Cleveland State. So this is something that TBR is very interested in, as you know. And we are in our infancy. We're taking baby steps. So just wanted to know your thoughts about that.
Sure.
And the others as well, of course.
Sure. Well, at Motlow, you may be familiar with their programs, but Motlow has a program which they called ACE, and that program was pretty successful. It was a hybrid format, short incremental time slots for courses, and I was there when we developed that. I think the year that I took the job in Georgia was the year they launched it. But I have followed that. I have a lot of friends there who I keep in touch with. I was also part of RODP and taught RODP, English 1101, although I don't think that was the number. I can't remember now what the number was. Grammar and Comp 1 and 2. And, Robbie Kendall Melton came on board to head up RODP around that time period, and I was part of a statewide committee at TBR which dealt with academic honesty. And that was a major concern early on in RODP. And once I left Tennessee to go to Georgia, Georgia has a program which they call eCore. And because I had taught online for RODP, I also wanted to teach online for eCore. And so I taught literature for eCore for 2 or 3 years. I gave it up a couple of years ago. It's just difficult to manage that and do my job too. But I did love teaching online. I thought it was a wonderful medium for students who might not otherwise have access to higher education, particularly non-traditional students who work, which is what the audience for the eCore program was. Now we have actually, I can't believe this, we are an eCore affiliate school. In Georgia, it's set up a little bit differently than RODP was set up, and it's actually just the core curriculum. So our core is set up differently than your core. We have an A through E, and A is communication, and B is institutional options, C is literature, humanities, D is math and science, and then E is social science. And then area F is an 18-hour kind of preparatory curriculum for whatever baccalaureate degree one is going to major in. So eCore covers A through E, and the way they do it is, as you do it here, you proctor exams for online students and so forth, and they required that, which kept the academic honesty at a high. There are institutions nationally, of course, who have not done that and have been called into question on some of their dishonest student behavior. But I think those are the kinds of things that, I would never want to be a total online school or a total alternate delivery school or anything like that. But I think what you have to do in order to recruit students and to grow an institution is to explore all options. And those are just 2 options, and they don't work for everybody. They don't work for traditional students sometimes. We actually have students who, not a lot, who come to our college. We have housing, so there's about 1,400 students living on campus, which is fun. And some of those students take online classes just because they don't want to get out of bed and walk across the campus. It's just laziness. And so they're not going to perform well in an online class like that. Whereas a non-traditional student who's working and really needs to make this, get this degree or diploma to get that promotion, they're going to be a little bit more motivated to get it done. I think there are other options, weekend options where degrees can be done. We've explored those kinds of things. We're actually exploring now adding what is called an E-major. It's a consortium of schools in Georgia that is adding the baccalaureate level programs to online kind of options for students, and we haven't done that yet. We're discussing whether or not we will do it. For our institution, we're very much an on-campus kind of institution where we have one small off-campus location, much smaller than your Athens campus. We have a lot of dual enrollment, not nearly as many as you do, but for us it's a lot. But most of our students are traditional students living on campus or commuting within a certain radius, about a 40-mile radius or so.
Dr. Reddick, I have a text from a viewer.
Oh, wow. A text from this is interesting. I feel like a presidential candidate or something.
Yeah.
I mean, like Obama or Romney.
Well, you're up there with them for us. So this person wants to know how you grew alumni, and if you could talk about how to increase donations from alumni as well as from faculty and staff supporters of the foundation.
Sure. I certainly won't say I did that. I think, a lot of times what happens is people take credit for work other people did. But I do think that as an institution, what we did was, and I certainly wasn't the person responsible for this idea. I thought it was an awesome idea, but I can't take the credit for it, although I'd like to. We partnered alumni in strategic areas of our state. And as I shared with the group earlier, two things, and I'll go back to Motlow in a minute, but we don't have a service area, really. Our whole state's the service area. So we're competing for students with all of the institutions in Georgia. I think there are 31. It shrunk. Actually, last week, I guess it's now 30. It shrunk from 31 to 30. There was a merger. But what we did was we coupled our alumni in strategic areas who had been supportive of the institution through the years with recruiters. And so in some cases, the alumni person went to school systems to meet with groups. In some cases, in fact, the president was in Florida. I talked to him last night. They had a recruitment event and an alumni event coupled together somewhere below Orlando. So they had 40 or 50 people who came out, and they let students know that we would be in the area, and so that has been beneficial. I also want to say, though, that I think that there are other ways to do that within a school like this school. Motlow, of course, has 11 counties in their service area, covering 4,500 square miles, which is a lot. But what they did was they took some key alumni in that area and they made commercials utilizing those alumni, and because they were in different counties, in different communities, those people were recognizable in that particular area. Whereas, an alumni might not be recognized if it's not someone that you know in your community. And that was very positive for them. So I think that's two different ways to do it. As far as garnering resources, I think that people give money to institutions for various things that they would like to see done. In most cases, that's scholarships. I think that's where a huge need is. I think that's where a huge need will be in the future, quite frankly. With more debt escalating, with student loans and so forth, I just think that there's going to be more need for private scholarships to help students who can't otherwise afford to go for that opportunity. So I think that's important. I think alumni do that. I think they do that well. But I think there are other things that alumni can do besides just scholarships, obviously. One of the alumni of our institution had bequeathed to the institution a gift of $1 million and did not specifically say what the institution had to do with that, but we had to entertain some various ideas and proposals to submit to the family. And that turned out to be an absolutely wonderful gift for our institution because it's utilized for not just scholarships. It can be utilized for scholarships, but it's also utilized for programming on the campus so that we have been able to put together some absolutely wonderful events. I'll give you one example was Hispanic Heritage Day back in the early fall this year. We had an opportunity by using some of this money to put together a huge Hispanic Heritage Day. And so what we did was we partnered with PBS, and you may have seen the episodes on Latino Americans that aired on PBS earlier this fall. They were absolutely wonderful historical kind of docudramas, I guess is what the terminology would be. But it was a wonderful learning experience, and we were able to partner with them. We had the producer from PBS on campus. We previewed it before it was nationally televised on PBS. And we had a panel discussion, which included speakers from Excellencia Foundation, from the Smithsonian Institution, the Hispanic, Latino, Hispanic Museum, part of the Smithsonian, author from the University of Monterrey in Mexico, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Georgia was represented, and the Mexican ambassador. And so we used part of those funds that we had available to fund the stipends and the travel that we needed to pull off this program. It was an absolutely wonderful program. I don't know how many seats are in here, probably 300, 350, right? It was packed. Our auditorium was completely packed. Standing room, people standing around. I'd never seen it. Of all the events that we've done, I've never seen that many events. And what a great testament to Hispanic heritage that we were able to use just a little bit of those funds to pull off something like that. You know, but that's just creativity and planning on our administration's part to pull off those kinds of events. I heard somebody say 1, 2. Oh, sorry.
Okay, after being at a community college and then you went to a 4-year institution, why are you now interested in returning to a community college? And as a follow-up to that, how many years could we realistically expect you to stay here before moving on to advance your career?
Well, I'll tell you two things. I'll answer both your questions, and I think you'll be satisfied with this answer. But first question, where I am currently is a state college which has limited baccalaureate degrees. It was very much it's never been a community college. Georgia is not structured that way. It's very different from Tennessee. The state colleges, they weren't actually even state colleges, but they were 2-year colleges. They didn't call them junior colleges specifically or community colleges, because we had a Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College. It was just a 2-year college up until 2006. So when I went in 2007, we started the first bachelor's degree program in January of that year. So to be honest with you, I really didn't know they had bachelor degrees or plans of that when I took the position, but I've worked a lot on that since I've been there, and I think it's been a very good experience for me. But the state colleges in Georgia are very limited in the number of bachelor degree programs that they will offer ever. So we still have a huge population that is a transfer population. And we have a huge population, like our nursing program, for example, has 280 seats in the nursing program, but it's a ADN, Associate Degree in Nursing. It's a RN degree. It's not a 4-year degree. So we don't have a lot of bachelor degree programs. I am interested in moving into a president's position, and I don't see really a major distinction between what I do now and this institution, quite frankly. I think when you get to the president's level, it's about other things than just the degrees that are available. So I'm 49 years old. When will I retire? Well, I told my wife, who disagrees with me, but I think that 10 years is long enough for me. I think at 60 I want to retire. I can write multiple books if I retire. You know, writers don't make a lot of money. You get 10% actually of book sales, and that's whether you're with HarperCollins or a small publisher like mine. But I think 10 years, would be long enough for me. I would retire. And so I don't think coming into a position like this that I would have a desire to do anything else. I would be Dolly Parton's personal manager, however, if she called. But of course, she's nearly 70. Uh-oh. Will's back.
If technology allowed it, there would be 4 gauges in your office or on your personal device when something were to happen. Save, natural disaster, or a terrorist attack. Excluding those 2 things. What 4 gauges would be on your desk if something were to happen on campus, and it would alert you to that? Pick 2 that you would fix right away, or at least try to fix right away, or 2 that you would let go for a little while.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good question. I had not anticipated that question, let me assure you. I think that happens all of the time. It happens in my current job. We don't have gauges, of course, on the walls, but we have issues that come up. And I'll just give you an example of how you deal with those issues. Whenever, an emergency situation comes up, you immediately respond. I mean, no matter what it is, whether it's a student who's in trouble. We had a student pass away on campus from a seizure, and that was a very traumatic kind of experience to go through, not only for, staff, but with the family and with the friends and the roommate and so forth. Those kinds of things require immediate reaction. And you can't know what that reaction will be. You can't predict it. And to say that you think you would behave in one way, it never works out that way. But I think you have to respond immediately and effectively. And those are very important. Similarly, however, a facilities issue, a leak, for example, you can let go for a little while, but that's got to be fixed too. So I don't think there's a gauge, Will, on anybody's desk or office or wall or whatever, which says postpone, for a long period of time. I think every issue has to be dealt with, and the sooner you deal with issues, the better those issues will be. Whether it's your own personal life, your health, or something within an institution. You just have to deal with stuff.
In the subject of athletics, what role do you see it playing in a college, and how do you support them?
Well, you could ask. You'd have to call Alan Kramer, our director of athletics, to find out how I support athletics. But I would support them on a number of levels. We have actually 6 sports on campus. We have women's softball, men's baseball, men's and women's tennis, women's soccer, and men's golf. We're talking about adding women's cross country. But our funding is not as good as it could be with respect to athletics, because we have to pay that out of athletic fee money. I go and speak to all the sports teams. Alan puts them together for me, and I go and talk to them about it. I've actually met with them on occasion when they have problems. They come see me because they've met me and they think I can solve their problems. Sometimes I can and sometimes I can't, depends on what kind of problem they're having. But so I support them in those kinds of ways. I can't attend, even in my current role, I can't attend. We have so many events going on a daily basis on our campus. It's literally impossible for me to attend all of those. Actually, the first year I was there, I had this delusion. I guess I deluded myself into thinking that I could do that. Dang near killed myself, But I do go to events and meetings when I can. We have an alumni ceremony that's attached to our homecoming ceremony. We don't call it homecoming anymore, but same kind of thing. And the Alumni Hall of Fame is where we bring back alumni who were actively engaged in whatever sport they were in at the time and made some remarkable or significant hurdle. And so we bring them in, we have a banquet, and it's a fundraiser also. But each team has their own fundraising kinds of things that they do, and I support those. Michelle, tell you how many checks I've written to support them in their fundraising efforts. And so those are some of the kind of examples that I would say. I think athletics plays a vital role because it allows you to recruit excellent students as well as excellent players from various high schools and build a team. And they should be supported, you know, on campus by other students. Unfortunately, I don't think that athletic teams at small colleges like your college and like my college are supported as much as they should be. You know, they're not going to get the attention, you know, say the volunteers get. But, you know, there's still some attention and some support there. And I think that's positive for an institution.
I wonder if you could give us an example of a time in your experience where you've been given a mandate or direction by a president or the state of Georgia or Tennessee, we need you to implement this. What was the process you went through to getting support and getting buy-in from faculty and staff? How did you, not a theoretical, but how did you actually work with, you know, all the different facets of campus to bring together and accomplish your goal?
Sure. Right now we have a what is called a CCG plan. We're a year into the CCG plan, which is Complete College Georgia. It's efforts to boost our retention, efforts to boost our graduation, efforts to prove that we're doing what we say we're doing from an accountability perspective. And we came up with a number of markers or goals that we wanted to hit as part of this process. And this was a statewide initiative. So we put together a team of people, and we sat down and we walked through it, and we, you know, the system itself didn't, well, they mandated that we all do this, but they didn't tell us specifically what you would do at your campus. That was kind of up to you. So we had a group of people that came together and gave us ideas, and that included some community folks, some faculty, some staff, and so forth. And we came up with these goals that we wanted to meet. Some of those, most of those actually we met within the year, but some of those we haven't met yet because we don't have the data necessarily that we need to meet them. And I'll give you an example. Earlier when I talked about the retention program that we put in place, that was one of the goals that we had. We wanted to increase our dual enrollment offerings. So we formed what we call now the Baldwin Academy, which includes our partners with the high schools where we offer dual joint enrollment. That helped us grow our enrollment, but at the same time it helped us get committed, good students. Students, while they're in the dual enrollment process, we hope to be able to recruit to stay with us rather than transfer to UGA or whatever university they want to transfer to, at least for a time. Hopefully they will stay for a bachelor's degree, but we don't have enough really for them all to stay for. So we know they'll transfer. One obstacle for us, I think, with respect to transfer is students tend to transfer out before they actually graduate. And so our graduation rates aren't as high. And so I think I also read in your strategic enrollment plan where you wanted to initiate this kind of reverse transfer. And that's where we want to do, and this is one where we don't have the data we need from a system level kind of perspective to be able to get those students to transfer back. A lot of students will go off to an institution, get their degree, maybe go to graduate school or go out into the job force at some point and think, you know, I went to Cleveland State for, I mean, almost 2 years. Surely I had enough credits to graduate. Why don't, I mean, I'd like to, that was an important time in my life. We get that all the time. And if we can possibly do it, we'll issue a diploma for them. but in some cases, that's always been a student-initiated process. The graduation process is a student process. So institutions didn't go back and try to graduate those students, even though you may know they went somewhere else. And so I think that's important. It's important from an accountability standpoint, but I think it's important from a performance funding standpoint, which is what we're doing in Georgia as well. We just don't have enough data at this point to help us with that. We know that the student was here up until a certain point. We have some data through the clearinghouse, which tells us that students transferred here or there or wherever. And you wouldn't believe, some of the crazy things that students do. They transfer sometimes 3 and 4 times. And they may eventually be successful, but you want them to have that degree from your institution. And so I think that's an area where we've still got some work to do to be able to work that out. Well, I think when you have the data to show the faculty or the staff that, look, this is the reality. And from a state perspective, we're expected to perform in this capacity. And so, this is not about an autocratic decision that I might make as a VP. I need other people's help to take us here. It's not one person's responsibility, it's everybody's shared responsibility to make that happen. And I think through simple meetings and talking through it, people came up with ideas. They weren't my ideas. Other people came up with ideas, and we went with those ideas. They were great ideas. And that in and of itself, I think, motivated people to jump on board and take us there. We're just not completely there yet.
Our allotted time is close to being up, but we'll take one more, I guess, Will.
We'll end with Will.
Your thoughts on the power of the textbook?
Well, I'm an old textbook guy. I write books and, I edit books, and there's something about having the page there. I still get new books and smell them like, you did in elementary school, looking for that ink smell. Maybe that did something to us neurologically or something, but I'm a believer in the book, and I think they're important, and I hate to see them go away, but they are extremely costly to students. And I think where you can, go to a PDF book or utilize some other sources, we should do that within reason. But I still like the book. I'm co-teaching a class now, Intro to Rural Studies with the Dean of Liberal Arts, and we required 2 books, but we tried to shop around and find the cheaper book, or the less expensive book, I should say, since I'm on television. It wasn't a cheaper book, but I do believe ebooks are also a good, investment for students.
I guess my question probably is, you go through your course in the semester, and it's more than obvious to you that a majority of your students are not getting textbooks for whatever reason. Cost, I won't bother with it. I'll deal with it.
Yeah,
but they're not dealing with it.
Absolutely.
And I can't read their minds, and I guess I could go up to each of them and say, "Do you have a book? Do you have a book? Do you have a book? Do you have a book?" But that defeats the purpose. So,
well, and it's not always about money. Sometimes they have money from their student loan or their Pell Grant or even out of pocket that they could have purchased the book. They just didn't purchase the book. I'll give you, this is the best story. It's a sad story, but a student went to his political science instructor on campus. He was failing the class. We're within 2 weeks of the end of the term, and he tells the professor, and this is a true story, tells the professor, "What can I do to pass this class?" If you've taught a class, you've had this experience most likely. And the professor, of course, as most of our faculty are, as most faculty, I believe, are everywhere, genuinely concerned and said, okay, if you made this on the final, you might could pull this grade, and you might get a D. I mean, you might can make it. And so what are you? Well, I don't know what my problem is. And he says, well, let me see your book. The guy pulls out the book, and it's still in the shrink wrap. He had not even taken the shrink wrap off of the book. He had not attempted to read the book or anything like that. And so the faculty member came to me and said, what in the world am I supposed to do? And I said, you should have hit him in the head with the book. No, I'm joking. Student affairs people, I'm joking. I wouldn't do something like that. But, you want to. You want to do that because sometimes you just don't know what else to do. But the fact of the matter is, I think it is a major issue. I don't know how you solve that problem. I think it goes back to what I said earlier about committed students, to get motivated students. Some people, nobody, when you were born, nobody said, you will fail, you will succeed, you will be a millionaire, you will get a PhD, you will do, nobody, it was up to you to do it. And I think it's up to them to do it. We think as a society that we need to remove the element of free will from the student, and that is simply not the case. Students can elect to fail, and that's just a fact. And I think legislators and other people who are in charge of funding need to come to that realization. I think most are pragmatic enough to know that not everyone is going to be successful. I do believe, however, in the power of the individual to be successful. I think they can. Whether or not they will do it is another matter. But absolutely, I think books are important, and we need to do what we can to lower the cost, but at the same time, we need to do what we can to encourage them to actively engage in their learning process by using the book. I hate to say it, but bring them to class with you. Let's open it up and look at this problem and get in groups or something, and how would you solve this problem? But now there are, and I do want to say this because I think it's an important point. One thing that I made sure that we did early on as an administrator, I did see students, when I was running the Smyrna campus, for example, I was very close to and in touch with students on a daily basis. And I knew what they were doing and what they weren't doing. And I was dealing with all that financial aid mess. And I knew people who didn't have the money to buy a book, and I knew people who did have the money. But what I made sure that we did was we had one book for every class that we offered. I mean, if you had 20 English classes, I don't mean 20 English books, but one book per whatever class it was, in the library or somewhere on file that students could go who did not have the funding to utilize that book. And it worked. Those who truly wanted to utilize it would go utilize it. And it helped those who really didn't have the money. And that was an access issue, quite frankly. All right. That's it.
All right, Dr. Reddick, thank you.
Any final questions? Something so many times in audiences people say, I wish I'd asked that and I didn't. Any of those? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.